Amara pressed her backpack straps tighter against her shoulders as she stepped out of the car and into the tall gates of Westbridge Academy. The sun was shining, but she felt a little cloud hanging over her heart. It was her first day at this new school, and everything around her felt so different from where she had come from. The buildings looked more like castles than classrooms, and the students walking past wore shiny shoes and expensive jackets that looked like they came from high-end stores. Amara's outfit was simple, a neat white shirt, jeans, and her favorite sneakers. She thought she looked fine, but the way some kids glanced at her told her that maybe they thought otherwise. She walked toward the main hallway, clutching her schedule in one hand. Students around her were laughing, hugging their friends, and comparing summer vacations. She overheard a girl talking about how her family had spent the summer in Paris. Another boy bragged about his trip to New York. Amara's summer had been quiet, spent at home with her parents and reading books, and she suddenly wondered if that would sound boring to the kids here. She tried to keep her chin up and reminded herself of her grandmother's words. "Amara, you belong anywhere you step. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Inside the classroom, the teacher welcomed her with a warm smile. "Class, this is Amara. She's new here, so please make her feel comfortable." Amara gave a polite nod and found a seat near the back. For a moment, she thought maybe things would be okay. But as soon as she sat down, she noticed a group of students whispering and glancing her way. A blonde girl with a shiny bracelet covered her mouth while laughing at something she whispered to her friend. Another boy smirked, looking her up and down. Amara tried to ignore it, focusing on the board as the teacher began the lesson. When the lunch bell rang, Amara walked to the cafeteria carrying her lunch tray. The room was crowded, filled with noise and chatter. She looked around for an empty seat, but most of the tables were full with groups of friends. She spotted a small corner table and sat quietly, opening her sandwich. At first it seemed peaceful, but it didn't take long before the same group from her class noticed her sitting alone. They approached with mocking smiles. "Well, look at her," the blonde girl said loudly enough for others to hear. "She doesn't even have a proper lunchbox. Did you get that sandwich from the discount store?" Laughter erupted from her friends. Another boy chimed in. "And those sneakers, are they even real? My cousin has the latest brand. These look like they came from the bargain bin." Amara kept her eyes on her sandwich, trying to stay calm. She had been taught not to answer cruelty with cruelty. Her grandmother always said, "Silence can sometimes be stronger than words." Still, the laughter stung like tiny needles. She wanted to disappear, but she sat tall, refusing to let them see her break. The group wasn't finished. One of them leaned closer and whispered, "I bet she's only here on a scholarship. No way her family could afford this place." Another burst into giggles, repeating the word scholarship like it was an insult. More students nearby started turning their heads, curious about the commotion. Some laughed along, others just watched, unsure what to do. In the middle of this, a boy at another table looked uneasy. His name was Ethan, and unlike the others, he didn't find the situation funny. He hated how the group was picking on the new girl, but he stayed quiet, afraid of becoming their next target. He stole glances at Amara, noticing how she stayed composed despite the taunts. Her calmness impressed him, but his guilt for staying silent weighed heavily on his chest. Amara finished her sandwich slowly, pretending not to hear them. Inside, her heart raced. She wanted to scream, to tell them they didn't know anything about her family, or about the truth of who she was, but she stopped herself. She reminded herself she was stronger than their words. She had faced challenges before, and she wasn't going to let a group of shallow classmates define her. The bell finally rang, releasing her from the cafeteria. She stood up, placed her tray neatly on the return counter, and walked out without a single word to the bullies. Her quiet dignity confused them. Some of them expected her to cry, shout, or at least respond, but her silence made them uncomfortable. For a brief moment, the blonde girl frowned, almost annoyed that Amara hadn't given her the reaction she wanted. Back in class, Amara sat down and opened her notebook. She let her pen glide across the page, but her thoughts were far away. She thought of her parents, who had encouraged her to take this opportunity at Westbridge Academy because they believed in her potential. They told her she would face difficulties, but she had the strength to rise above them. She thought of her grandmother again, the voice that lived in her memory. "They may laugh today, but one day they will see your light." The rest of the day passed slowly. In every class, Amara felt the stares. Sometimes she caught students whispering behind her back, But not everyone looked at her with unkind eyes. A few students seemed curious, even respectful, as if they noticed the quiet confidence she carried. Ethan, in particular, found himself watching her more than he expected. He admired how she didn't crumble under pressure, even though he could see the sadness in her eyes. When the final bell rang, Amara walked out of the building into the afternoon sun. She breathed deeply, relieved that her first day was over. She knew it hadn't gone perfectly, but she also knew she had survived. She walked toward the car, waiting for her steps steady, her head held high. She didn't see the bullies watching from a distance, whispering and plotting their next move. But she didn't care. Deep inside, she carried a secret that none of them knew. A truth that, when revealed, would change everything. As she got into the car and closed the door, she let out the breath she had been holding all day. Her driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "How was your first day, Miss Amara?" he asked kindly. Amara gave him a small smile. "It was fine," she replied softly. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't a lie either. She knew tomorrow would bring more challenges, but she also knew something the bullies didn't, that she wasn't just another new student. She was the heiress of a powerful family. Though she wanted to keep that hidden for now, she leaned back in the seat, watching the trees pass by, and whispered to herself, "One day they'll know." The next morning, Amara stood in front of her mirror, tying her hair neatly into a ponytail. She looked at her reflection and gave herself a small nod. Yesterday had been tough, but she had survived. She reminded herself that one bad day did not define her. Still, as she walked down the stairs, her chest felt heavy. Her mother noticed the quiet worry in her daughter's eyes, but said nothing. She only placed a warm hand on Amara's shoulder and whispered, "Remember, you are strong. The world may not always be kind, but you must always be kind to yourself." Amara carried those words with her as she stepped into the car. At school, the hallways buzzed with energy. Students were gathering at their lockers, laughing and sharing stories. When Amara walked past, she could feel the whispers begin again. She didn't have to hear the words to know they were about her. She kept her head high, but deep inside she wished just once she could walk without feeling all eyes on her. She reached her locker, opened it quietly, and began arranging her books. Suddenly, a folded piece of paper slipped out. She picked it up and opened it. Written inside were cruel words scribbled in messy handwriting. "Go back to where you belong." Amara's hands trembled for a moment, but she quickly folded the paper back and placed it into her bag. She would not give them the reaction they wanted. In her next class, she tried to concentrate, but the same group of bullies made their presence known. The blonde girl leaned back in her chair, whispering loudly enough for Amara to hear. "I heard she doesn't even have a proper house. Probably lives in some tiny apartment." The others giggled. Another boy added, "She'll never fit in here. This school isn't for people like her." Their words were sharp, but Amara kept her eyes on her notebook. She told herself again and again, "Stay calm. They don't know you. They don't know your truth." At lunch, things grew worse. She entered the cafeteria and stood in line, holding her tray. Behind her, she heard the group again. "Look at her," one boy sneered. "She probably has the same lunch every day. A plain sandwich. How boring." They laughed as though it was the funniest thing in the world. Amara's heart pounded, but she stayed silent, taking her tray to the same quiet corner as yesterday. She sat down, unwrapped her sandwich, and took a bite, pretending not to notice the group staring at her. This time, though, the bullies did not stop at words. One of the girls walked past her table and accidentally knocked Amara's juice over. The liquid spilled across the table and dripped onto the floor. The group burst out laughing. "Oops, my mistake," the girl said with fake sweetness. Amara calmly grabbed a napkin and cleaned up the mess without saying a word. Her silence once again unsettled them. Some expected her to cry or shout, but she didn't. Instead, she finished her lunch and carried her tray away with dignity. The bullies exchanged puzzled glances. Why didn't she fight back? Why didn't she give them the reaction they wanted? Ethan watched everything from a distance. He felt his stomach twist with guilt. Each time he saw Amara being treated this way, he wanted to stand up for her, but fear held him back. He knew if he spoke out, the bullies might turn on him, and he wasn't sure he was strong enough to face that. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about the courage Amara showed by saying nothing. He admired her, even though he had never spoken to her. Later that week, the class was divided into groups for a science project. When the teacher called out names, Amara's heart sank. She had been placed in the same group as the bullies. As soon as the teacher left the room, they began whispering. "We don't want her in our group," the blonde girl announced. "She'll drag us down." Another boy laughed. "Maybe she doesn't even know how to use a computer." They all chuckled while Amara sat quietly, her hands folded on the desk. The group ignored her suggestions and pushed her aside, acting as though she didn't exist. It was a painful moment, but Amara reminded herself of her grandmother's wisdom. They cannot take away your intelligence. They cannot touch your heart. After school, Amara walked slowly to the car waiting for her. She sat in the back seat staring out the window. She didn't tell her parents what had happened. She didn't want to worry them. Instead, she whispered quietly to herself, "I will get through this. I know who I am, even if they don't." The driver glanced at her through the mirror, sensing her sadness, but said nothing. He knew that sometimes silence was the greatest comfort. The days turned into weeks, and the bullying continued. Amara's books were knocked off her desk. Cruel notes were slipped into her locker. Whispered insults followed her down the hallways. She endured it all with quiet strength, refusing to let their words break her. But the truth was, each insult left a small scar inside her heart. She carried those scars home every night, smiling in front of her family but feeling the weight of them when she was alone in her room. One evening, Amara sat at her desk, trying to finish her homework. She couldn't focus. The cruel words from the day kept echoing in her head. She put down her pencil and looked out the window. The stars twinkled above, and she remembered something her grandmother once told her while they were stargazing. The stars shine brightest in the darkest skies. Remember that, Amara. She smiled faintly, wiped away a small tear, and whispered, "I will shine too, no matter what." At school the next day, Amara walked into class with that thought in her heart. She sat down and began writing notes before the teacher even arrived. The bullies noticed her calm expression and grew restless. Their words seemed to bounce off her more than before. Ethan, sitting nearby, couldn't help but admire her strength again. He thought to himself, "She's stronger than all of us combined. Why can't I be brave enough to stand by her?" That afternoon, the teacher announced that the school was organizing a charity fundraiser gala. Families were invited and students were encouraged to attend. The room buzzed with excitement as kids discussed what they would wear and which of their parents might donate. The bullies smirked and glanced at Amara. "Bet her family won't come," the blonde girl whispered. "They probably can't even afford the ticket." The others laughed, but Amara didn't react. She simply wrote the date down in her planner, her face calm but her heart beating fast. She knew something they didn't. She knew that this event would change everything. When the final bell rang, Amara walked out into the crisp afternoon air. She felt tired, but inside her chest a small spark of hope flickered. She thought about the upcoming gala and the secret her classmates had no idea about. One day soon the truth would be revealed. One day their laughter would freeze on their lips. And until that day came, Amara would walk with quiet dignity, holding onto her inner strength like a shield. The days passed quickly after the announcement of the fundraiser gala, and the excitement in school only grew stronger. Everywhere Amara went, she heard her classmates talking about it. Girls compared the dresses they planned to wear, while boys bragged about which luxury car their parents would arrive in. Teachers reminded students about rehearsals, speeches, and performances that would be part of the evening. For most students, it was the biggest social event of the year. For Amara, it was another reminder of how different she seemed to everyone around her. She sat at her desk during class while the blonde girl and her friends whispered loudly behind her. "I bet she won't even come," one of them said. "Her family probably can't afford fancy clothes. Imagine showing up in those sneakers." They giggled, making sure Amara could hear every word. Amara kept her head down, pretending to be focused on her notes, though her ears burned. Their voices followed her even as the teacher began the lesson. She clenched her pencil tightly but did not respond. She had promised herself that she would not let them see her cry. At lunch, the same group sat at a large table in the middle of the cafeteria, speaking even louder than usual. "My mom's buying me a designer gown," the blonde girl said proudly. "It cost more than $1,000. She looked directly at Amara as if daring her to respond. Amara quietly unwrapped her sandwich and ate in silence. The bullies laughed again. "What about you, Amara? Are you going to wear jeans to the gala?" One boy shouted across the room. A few kids laughed along, but others looked uncomfortable. Ethan sat nearby, frowning. He wanted to speak up, but again his voice failed him. He told himself, maybe at the gala things will be different. At home, however, Amara's life looked nothing like the picture her classmates painted of her. Their mansion stood tall on a hill, its wide garden filled with flowers her mother loved. Inside, polished floors and warm chandeliers lit up the rooms. Amara walked into the living room, where her parents were discussing the fundraiser with the headmaster on a video call. They were one of the main sponsors of the event, donating money that would help provide scholarships for less fortunate students. Amara sat quietly, listening as her father confirmed the details. When the call ended, her mother turned to her with a gentle smile. "You will come with us, won't you?" she asked. Amara nodded slowly. "Of course, Mama." Her mother touched her cheek and said softly, "Then wear the dress I picked for you. It's time they see who you are." The night of the gala finally arrived. The school's grand hall was decorated with golden lights, red carpets, and sparkling chandeliers. Expensive cars lined the driveway as families arrived one after another. Students entered the hall dressed in gowns and suits, their parents beside them. The bullies stood near the entrance, admiring each arrival. "Look at the Martins' car," the blonde girl whispered to her friends. "It must have cost a fortune. And the Thompsons' dresses, straight from Milan." They were laughing and gossiping when a sleek black car rolled up to the entrance. The chauffeur stepped out and opened the door. Everyone turned their heads. Out stepped Amara's father, tall and dignified, wearing a sharp black suit. Beside him was Amara's mother, graceful in a long emerald gown, her presence commanding respect. The crowd gasped as the teachers rushed forward to greet them. Whispers spread quickly. "That's Mr. and Mrs. Daniels. Aren't they the owners of Daniels Enterprises? Didn't they fund half of this school's new library? They're one of the wealthiest families in the state." Parents and teachers hurried to shake their hands, smiling and praising them. The bullies froze, their eyes widening in disbelief. Then Amara stepped out of the car. She wore a simple but elegant blue gown that flowed around her as she walked. Her hair was styled neatly, and a small silver necklace sparkled at her neck. She didn't look nervous. Instead, she carried herself with quiet grace, walking beside her parents with her head held high. The same students who had laughed at her now stared in silence. Some of them whispered to each other, shocked at what they were seeing. The blonde girl's jaw dropped, her bracelet-clad hand frozen in midair. The boys who had mocked her plain sneakers couldn't stop staring at her shining shoes and gown. Inside the hall, Amara's family was greeted warmly by the headmaster. "We are so honored to have the Daniels family here tonight," he announced. "Their generosity has made this event possible." Applause filled the room. Amara looked around, her heart racing. For once, the laughter she heard wasn't at her. It was applause for her family. She spotted Ethan across the room. He smiled at her, a sincere smile that gave her a little strength. For the first time since joining Westbridge, Amara felt seen, not for the cruel image her bullies painted of her, but for the truth of who she really was. The bullies huddled together, whispering frantically. "I don't believe this," the blonde girl muttered. She's one of them," one of the boys swallowed hard. "Her dad is Mr. Daniels? The billionaire?" They exchanged uneasy looks. Their laughter from earlier seemed far away now, replaced by nervous silence. They had mocked her, excluded her, treated her like she didn't belong. Yet here she was, walking in with more dignity than any of them could imagine. As the evening continued, the headmaster introduced speakers and performers. Parents made donations and students sang or performed music. Amara sat with her parents, quiet but glowing with pride. She didn't need to say anything. The truth was unfolding all on its own. When her father gave a short speech about giving back to the community, he mentioned Amara. "We are proud of our daughter Amara," he said warmly. "She reminds us every day that kindness and strength are more valuable than wealth." The audience applauded again. Amara felt her eyes sting, not with sadness this time, but with happiness. She glanced at the bullies' table and saw them sitting stiffly, unable to look her in the eye. Later, during the dinner, several parents approached Amara to compliment her. "You're very brave to start at a new school," one woman said kindly. "Your parents must be proud." Amara thanked her politely, her smile gentle. Around her, the whispers grew softer, shifting from cruel gossip to quiet admiration. The same classmates who had laughed at her plain clothes yesterday now saw her in a new light. Some were embarrassed, some jealous, but all of them were silent. For once, Amara's silence wasn't a shield against cruelty. It was a crown. As the evening drew to a close, Amara stood near the stage, looking out at the glowing hall. She thought about her first days at Westbridge, about the cruel words and mocking laughter. She thought about the notes in her locker and the spilled juice in the cafeteria. All those moments had felt heavy, but now she felt lighter. She knew tomorrow at school things would not be the same. The bullies had seen the truth with their own eyes, and no amount of gossip could erase it. They knew now who she was. But more importantly, she knew who she was, and she didn't need their approval to shine. As the lights dimmed and the families began leaving, Amara walked back to the car with her parents. She glanced back at the school once more. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged. Not because of wealth, not because of her family's name, but because she had faced cruelty with dignity and come out stronger. She whispered softly to herself, "One day, they'll learn that respect is worth more than riches." And with that, she stepped into the car, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The following Monday morning, the atmosphere at Westbridge Academy was completely different. The gala had ended only 2 nights earlier, but the memory of it still lingered in everyone's mind. Students crowded in the hallways, still whispering about the dresses, the decorations, and most of all, about the surprise that no one had expected. Amara, the girl they had mocked and laughed at, had arrived with her parents, who were not just wealthy but respected across the state. The news had spread like wildfire, and even students who hadn't attended the gala knew the details. Amara walked into school that morning with her books held close to her chest. She wore her simple uniform like always, her sneakers tied neatly and her hair pulled back. She didn't try to change who she was even after everyone had seen the truth. Yet the way people looked at her was no longer the same. The stares she received weren't filled with mockery now. They were filled with shock, curiosity, and even nervous respect. Some students whispered when she passed, but this time their whispers were not cruel. They were uncertain. At her locker, she found a few classmates who had once laughed at her standing nearby. They looked at her, hesitated, then quickly looked away as if embarrassed. The blonde girl, who had led most of the bullying, stood at the end of the hallway with her friends. She folded her arms and tried to look confident, but her face was pale. She hadn't expected Amara to walk into the gala with elegance and grace, and she certainly hadn't expected her to be the heiress of one of the wealthiest families in the state. As Amara pulled out her books, Ethan walked over. He had been thinking about her all weekend, remembering how she had looked at the gala, calm and dignified. "Hi, Amara," he said gently. She looked up surprised, then gave him a small smile. "Hi," she replied softly. Ethan hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I wanted to say sorry for not standing up for you before. I should have said something." Amara studied his face. She could see the honesty in his eyes, the regret that weighed on him. She gave a faint smile and said, "It's okay, Ethan. It's hard to stand up when everyone else is laughing, but thank you for saying this now." He nodded, relieved that she didn't push him away. For Ethan, that small moment meant more than he could explain. The day continued, and in every class Amara noticed the change. Teachers, who had always treated her fairly but perhaps underestimated her, now looked at her with a new kind of admiration. Students who had once ignored her now tried to sit closer, hoping to be part of her circle. During group projects, no one excluded her anymore. In fact, some eagerly asked for her ideas, but Amara remained calm. She didn't rush to accept their sudden friendliness because she knew it came not from genuine kindness, but from shock and curiosity. At lunchtime, the cafeteria felt unusually quiet when she entered. Normally, the bullies would start their whispering the moment she walked in, but today they didn't. Instead, they sat at their table watching her nervously. Amara walked past them with her tray and sat down at her usual corner table. She wasn't interested in making a scene. To her, it was just another day and she wanted to eat in peace, but the bullies couldn't sit still. The blonde girl finally stood up, her friends following reluctantly. She walked over to Amara's table with a stiff smile plastered on her face. "Hey, Amara," she said awkwardly, about before. We were just joking around." "We didn't mean anything." Her voice trembled slightly and her friends nodded quickly, trying to back her up. Amara looked at them calmly. She didn't raise her voice or show anger. She simply said, "Words can hurt even when you say you're just joking. But I'm not angry. I just hope you treat the next new student better than you treated me." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The blonde girl's smile faltered and she shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't expecting forgiveness delivered with so much grace. "Yeah, sure," she muttered before turning back to her table, her friends following. The entire cafeteria had gone silent during the exchange, and many students looked at Amara with newfound respect. She hadn't humiliated the bullies or used her family's wealth to boast. Instead, she had chosen dignity. That silence, that kindness made more of an impact than anger ever could. Later in the day, during an assembly, the headmaster addressed the entire school. He thanked the families who had supported the gala and spoke proudly of the Daniels family's contribution. "Their generosity," he said, "has made it possible for more scholarships to be offered next year. Students who dream of being here will now have that chance." He then looked toward Amara, who sat quietly in the crowd. "And we must also remember that our strength as a community lies not in how wealthy we are, but in how we treat one another. Every student deserves respect." His words made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats, especially those who had mocked Amara before. When the assembly ended, Ethan caught up to Amara again. "You were amazing today," he said with a smile. "The way you handled them in the cafeteria, I don't think I could have done that." Amara shook her head gently. "It's not about being amazing. It's about remembering that their words don't define me. I define myself." Ethan nodded, deeply moved. As the week went on, Amara's world at Westbridge began to change. She was no longer the target of cruel jokes. Some students even tried to befriend her, bringing her into conversations and asking her to sit with them. Amara accepted kindness but stayed cautious. She knew some of them were only curious about her wealth and status. She didn't need people who liked her because of her family's name. What she wanted were real friends, people who saw her for who she truly was. One afternoon, Ethan found her sitting under a tree in the schoolyard reading a book. He sat down beside her, nervous but determined. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She closed her book and looked at him. "Sure." He hesitated, then asked, "How do you stay so calm?" "After everything they did to you, I would have gotten angry." Amara thought for a moment before answering. "I guess I remember what my grandmother used to tell me. She said people can take away your comfort, your peace, even your smile for a while. But they can never take away your dignity unless you give it to them. I just try to hold on to that." Ethan was silent for a moment, then smiled softly. "That's powerful. I think I needed to hear that too." Amara smiled back, and for the first time since coming to Westbridge, she felt a real connection forming. Ethan wasn't pretending to be her friend because of her family's money. He saw her strength and wanted to learn from it. As the school day ended and students left for home, the bullies lingered quietly near the gates. They no longer laughed when Amara passed. Instead, they lowered their eyes, guilt written on their faces. They had learned the hard way that mocking someone without knowing their story could lead to shame. Amara walked past them without a word, not out of arrogance but out of peace. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. The truth had already spoken for her. When she got home that evening, Amara sat with her parents at dinner. They asked her about her day, and she shared what had happened. Her father smiled proudly. "I'm glad you handled it with grace. Remember, respect is not demanded, it is earned." Her mother added gently, "And you've earned it, Amara, not because of who we are, but because of who you are." Amara smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She realized that even though the bullies had tried to break her spirit, they had failed. Instead, their cruelty had given her a chance to prove her strength. And now, she was no longer just the girl they laughed at. She was the girl who taught them a lesson without ever raising her voice. The days after the gala and the assembly blended into a new rhythm at Westbridge Academy. Life in the hallways no longer carried the sharp sting of cruel laughter aimed at Amara. Instead, there was a strange, quiet respect that followed her wherever she went. It wasn't the kind of loud admiration reserved for the most popular students, but it was noticeable. People who once whispered behind her back now lowered their voices when she walked by, and some even tried to smile at her. Amara, however, stayed the same. She still walked to class with her books clutched in her arms, still wore her simple sneakers, and still chose the corner table in the cafeteria where she could eat in peace. She had no desire to show off her family's wealth or prove herself through fancy clothes. She knew who she was, and that was enough. But everyone else at school seemed to be learning who she really was, too. The bullies, who once strutted through the halls with confidence, now looked uneasy whenever Amara was near. The blonde girl, who had once been the loudest voice mocking her, now avoided eye contact. She no longer laughed when Amara entered the cafeteria. Instead, she sat quietly, as though afraid someone might bring up what had happened. One morning, as Amara was gathering her books from her locker, the blonde girl hesitated before approaching. Her face was red with embarrassment, and her voice trembled when she spoke. "Amara," she began, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. For the things I said, the way I treated you. It wasn't right." Amara looked at her calmly. She could see that the girl was struggling to find the right words. After a long pause, Amara simply nodded. "Thank you for saying that," she replied softly. "But just remember, it's not about me. It's about how you treat the next person who's different." The blonde girl nodded quickly, clearly humbled, before walking away. Amara didn't smile or offer her forgiveness with excitement. Instead, she left her words as a quiet reminder. In the cafeteria that day, something unusual happened. A new student, shy and nervous, walked in holding a tray. She looked lost as she scanned the crowded room. For a moment, Amara saw a reflection of herself in that girl. She remembered her own first day. The fear, the loneliness, and the sting of cruel laughter. Before the bullies could take notice, Amara waved the girl over to her table. "You can sit here," she said with a warm smile. The girl's face lit up with relief as she quickly joined her. Ethan, who had been walking by, noticed the scene and couldn't help but smile to himself. He admired how Amara used her strength not just for herself, but to lift others too. Over time, Ethan and Amara grew closer. He often walked with her between classes, sometimes carrying extra books when her hands were full. He listened when she spoke and respected her silences when she preferred to stay quiet. One afternoon, while sitting under the same tree where they had spoken before, Ethan asked, "Do you think things are really different now? Do you think the bullying will stop for good?" Amara thought for a moment, her eyes fixed on the sky above. "People change slowly," she said finally. "Maybe they won't stop thinking the way they do right away. But if they learn something from what happened, maybe they'll be kinder next time. That's all I can hope for." Ethan nodded. "Well, I think you've already taught them something big. You showed them that money doesn't define who you are. Your strength did." Amara smiled faintly at his words, though she didn't respond. Deep inside, she felt grateful for his sincerity. As the weeks turned into months, Amara began to enjoy her time at Westbridge more. She participated in class discussions, and some students even sought her help with assignments. She discovered she was good at math and even better at writing. Teachers encouraged her to share her thoughts, and she slowly began to feel like she truly belonged. Not because of her family name, but because of her own abilities. The bullies never mocked her again. Their arrogance seemed to fade after the gala. Some of them even tried to act friendly, though Amara could see through their false smiles. She remained polite but distant, never forgetting how quickly they had turned against her when they thought she was weak. She didn't need their approval anymore. She had found her strength in her own voice, and that was more powerful than anything else. One evening, Amara sat at home with her parents after dinner. Her father asked about school, and she shared the changes she had noticed. Her mother listened quietly before saying, "Amara, I'm proud of you. Not because people know who your family is now, but because you didn't let their cruelty change your heart. You stayed kind even when they weren't." Her father nodded in agreement. "That's what true strength looks like," he said firmly. "Respect isn't earned with money or power. It's earned with character. And you, my daughter, have shown that to everyone." Amara's chest swelled with warmth. She realized that the journey she had gone through at Westbridge was not just about surviving bullying. It was about discovering herself, standing tall in the face of cruelty, and proving that dignity was stronger than hate. The next morning at school, she passed by a group of younger students who whispered her name with admiration. Instead of feeling uncomfortable, Amara smiled at them kindly. She wanted them to know that she wasn't untouchable, that she was someone they could approach if they ever needed help. She knew now that her story at Westbridge was just beginning, but it was beginning on her terms. As the school year continued, Amara remained true to herself. She didn't try to become the most popular student, nor did she use her wealth to gain attention. She focused on her studies, nurtured her new friendship with Ethan, and made small but meaningful connections with those who were genuine. She became a quiet example of resilience, a reminder that strength doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it speaks in silence, in kindness, in the way one chooses not to respond to cruelty with cruelty. By the end of the year, even the bullies had changed in small ways. They no longer mocked others openly, perhaps out of guilt or maybe out of fear that their cruelty could backfire again. But in truth, it was Amara's presence that reminded them every day that appearances can be deceiving. They had judged her based on skin color, on clothes, on quietness, and they had been proven wrong. One afternoon, as she walked out of the school gates, Ethan walked beside her and said, "You know, Amara, I think you've changed this place. People think twice before they laugh at someone now. And that's because of you." Amara looked at him with a gentle smile. Maybe, or maybe they just needed to see for themselves that kindness is stronger than cruelty. She looked back at the school building, sunlight shining on the windows. She knew her journey wasn't over. Life would bring more challenges, more people who might doubt her. But now she carried something inside her that no one could take away: her dignity, her strength, and her belief that she was enough. And with that, Amara walked forward, her steps steady and her spirit unshaken. She had entered Westbridge as the girl who was mocked, but she had become something much greater. She had become the girl who taught everyone a lesson they would never forget. Never judge someone by how they look or what they wear, because the truth behind their story might leave you speechless.